SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
State Treasurer David McRae is returning record amounts of money to Mississippians, whether it's through the College and Career Savings Program or the millions in unclaimed money awaiting your claim. Treasurer David McRae says get your application and claims today. Treasury.ms.gov.
It's time for True American Heroes. For the Record with Jack Rutland. Another exclusive on SuperTalk Mississippi 102.1 FM. Many of our heroes have taken their stories with them to the grave. But this show is about the stories and personal experiences of these veterans.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're glad to have you with us today as we have another of our interviews of local veterans on True American Heroes for the Record. I'm Jack Rutland, and I'm glad to have you listening in today. And today I'm honored to have with me Mr. Mal Jones, a native of Hazelhurst, Mississippi. That's where he's living now. And he has very graciously consented to come in and share with us some of his experiences as a serviceman in the United States Navy during World War II. And so, Mr. Mal, we're honored to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate being here, and I think it's a wonderful program you folks are doing here on the show.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to do this for myself, and we also do this because of our association with the Brookhaven's Military Memorial Museum, and we're very gracious and grateful for the radio station that does this for us, and we're now approaching 40 interviews that we've done over the last few years. But let's get right into your experiences, Mr. Mal. Well, first of all, I want to go back and let everybody get an idea about who we're talking to. And you were actually born and raised where?
Well, I was born in West Virginia, and my father worked for the railroad, so he was transferred. We lived in Georgia, Florida, Virginia, and Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And, of course, later in life here in Mississippi.
Okay, so tell me where you were living at the end of, during your high school years. Where were you living then?
Well, now, I was in an orphan's home for about 7 years, so it was in Salem, Virginia.
Interesting.
And that's where most of my high school stuff went on in Salem.
Okay.
And then from there to Washington, D.C.
Okay. All right. So then let's progress a little further in time, and let's look at the lead up to World War II. Do you remember where you were when you heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed?
Well, I remember what I was doing when Pearl Harbor was bombed. I was listening to the radio. A Washington Redskin football game was about to begin.
Wow. When
they made the announcement. And I knew a little bit about history and heard of Pearl Harbor, but then it dawned on me a little while later exactly what was going on there.
Were your friends and the people that you were around when that announcement came across in World War II actually grabbed the United States and pulled it into the conflict? What did you remember any of your thoughts? I mean, were you shocked?
No, not at that time. I was still in high school then. Yeah. I didn't think anything about it.
Yeah, just a youngster.
No, I was living with my parents at that time.
Okay, neat.
So we were sitting up there listening, waiting for the game to start. I'll never forget it.
Wow.
What gave me the hint when I first heard said all military personnel report back to base. That was before they really said what was going on.
And then they mentioned what had happened. Mm-hmm. All right. So you're living in Washington at that time.
Right.
And then, of course, shortly after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt and Congress declare war on the nation of Japan, and then eventually the Axis, all of the other folks who ended up against us in World War II. When did you start thinking about joining the service?
Well, at that time, patriotism at that time was a lot different from now. You thought about it just about immediately. Of course, all the publicity they had about the war going on and troops and all like this, and everybody really got enthused about it. A lot more than today, of course.
That's interesting.
And I would always like the water, so I wanted to join the Navy. And my mother wouldn't sign for me. I was still in high school at this time. She wouldn't sign for me, so it went on and on. Finally, the draft picked me up, and I volunteered for the Navy.
Okay. So when you were drafted, it usually meant you were going to the Army, period.
Right.
But you could volunteer for a specific service, and you did for the Navy.
Well, I did for the Navy. See, I'd already talked to the Navy personnel. It's a little story, if you don't mind, to tell you. We were at Fort Myer, Virginia. Army man came in, the Navy, Marine, Coast Guard came in. They called a bunch of people out and left me sitting there. I said, oh, heck, I'm in the Army now, So a little while later, the Navy chief came in and called my name. And the way this came about, my grandmother was a friend of Senator Walter George of Georgia. Oh. And she knew him vaguely and pulled a few punches in this thing. And that's how I ended up.
And you got to be in the Navy.
In the Navy.
Well, that's a wonderful story. That's what this program's all about, are those stories behind the scenes for the record.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So you end up getting to wear the Navy uniform, serving in the United States Navy. Where did they send you for training? What kind of training did you start off?
We went to Bainbridge, Maryland.
Okay.
It's a naval station. They opened up a training station in Bainbridge, but it's been closed now, of course.
Sure.
And we were up there for boot camp, as we called it. And then for gunnery school, which I went to, they told we was going south, and all we could see was the sunny bombs of Florida. Well, it was South Campus. So
it wasn't Florida.
No, but anyway, went to gunnery school there, and over there for about 3 months.
Okay.
And then left from there, I went to New York. The ship was there at that time, but in the meantime, when I got up there, they had left. So we're up there at the famous Pier 92, as they call it.
Now, why was it called famous Pier 92?
Well, I understand it's Admiral had it in for everybody. And it was actually on one of the huge piers up in New York. And that's where these returnees would come in, survivors,
right.
New recruits and all. And it was just a rough place. You sit out there and eat, and there's trucks running up and down that road all the time.
Oh, my goodness.
It was a mess.
It was a lot of people, a lot of humanity in a small space.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you get assigned sea duty, or to a ship.
Yeah, right, USS Raven.
All right, so you were assigned to the USS Raven, and the war had been going on a couple of years at this point. Now tell us about the USS Raven.
Well, the Raven was a minesweeper. It was the first ship that was built strictly for mine sweeping at that particular time. And the Raven and the Osprey was launched and built and launched the same date.
Wow.
And so they ended up, they called them AMs, Auxiliary Minesweepers. We had 11 of them in the squadron I was in. Of course, they built hundreds of others. England got a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. If everything on it was strictly for mine laying to begin with, and they changed it, made strictly sweepers.
Okay, let's make sure our listeners understand what a mine is. It was a significant part of World War II naval action,
right?
Because they were great weapons. But the mine sweeper, originally you were laying mines, but you later were finding and destroying mines.
Right.
But tell us what a mine is.
Okay, well, there are 4 different types of mines that we contended with. One is the old, they're known as contact mines. That's the one people are familiar with, a big round black bob with spikes on it. Mm-hmm. Then you had a magnetic mine, which all metal ships transmit a certain amount of
static electricity,
of energy, I guess you'd call it.
Right.
And it sets them off like 2 magnets trying to go together. And then you had the oyster mine, or acoustic, and it was a ship going over and pressing the water down, and it caused that to like a clamshell, you might say, and it closed up. And then you had the acoustic mine with the noise of the ship propeller in the water would set those off. So that was the ones we contended with.
So the purpose of the mine was to do what?
To blow
sink
up in
ships.
The ship.
That's right.
To blow it up, sink it, to put it out of commission.
And they were packed full of explosives.
Hundreds of thousands of them in World War II all over the world. Probably, I'd say 1 million. I wouldn't be exaggerating, I don't believe, because everybody using them were cheap, especially those big black ones. They were real cheap.
And they were weighted, so they stayed somewhat stationary?
Most of them stayed on the bottom of the ocean.
Okay.
They would rest on the bottom, but then the black one, like I say, the popular one, the ones that known, they were suspended in mid-air, mid-water, more or less.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes you couldn't even see them because they were under the water.
No, you couldn't see them. Later on, we started, after we got down to the Mediterranean, we used blimps, and they could spot them down underwater from the blimp, but out there, ordinarily you couldn't see them, no.
Incredible. Mm-hmm. All right, so you're assigned to the USS Raven,
all right,
which is a minesweeper, and your first duty with the Raven was, what were y'all doing?
Escort duty primarily from New York, Nova Scotia down to South America, escorting tankers.
Escorting convoys.
Convoys, right?
Many troop ships, fuel, or mainly what kind of convoys?
Primarily oilers, because Aruba and Curacao, big oil islands off South America, and we'd go down there and escort them back and forth.
So you were having to contend at that time with the German U-boats.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, in fact, the first trip I made was down to Aruba. And on the way back to New York, they sent us over the Mediterranean to pick up survivors of a torpedoed tanker. It was about 16 of them. They thought they were heading home, but they weren't. They were heading out to the ocean, didn't know it. And we picked them up. They had been out there for about 4 or 5 days, but all of them were all right, though.
That's incredible. Now, we're talking today. We're very honored to have Mr. Miles Jones, no stranger to the community from Hazelhurst, who is sharing with us his experiences from World War II. As he served on the USS Raven, which was a minesweeper. We're going to talk further with him. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back. Today we're honored to have with us Mr. Miles Jones, veteran of World War II, and a Navy veteran at that, and he's sharing with us experiences that he had, personal experiences he had on the United States ship Raven, which was a mine sweep. Now, many folks are not familiar with that. Mr. Miles was talking to us. You were sharing with us, sir, about the mines. But you also just said that we were talking right before the break about having convoy duty, which was extremely dangerous during the war because the German submarines, the wolf packs as they called them, were constantly across the North Atlantic. Tell us what it was like to be on convoy duty. I mean, first of all, it wasn't a short trip.
Oh, no.
How many days, roughly?
Yeah. Well, I'd probably say about 6 or 7 days because the fastest convoy is the slowest ship.
That's right.
And you got to remember that.
You can only go as fast as the slowest ship.
And we would patrol up and down the convoy route, trying to spot any submarines, contacts, or anything like that. But one time we'd hit contact on one with depth charge, but we don't know whether we did anything or not.
And that's something I did not realize, that you had your ship had the ability to put down depth charges, which were explosive devices that usually came off either the tail of the ship, the stern, or the sides.
The Y gun, they called it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that minesweeps could also do a submarine battle.
Like I say, they built these ships originally as for mine layer, and then they changed to minesweepers entirely. So everything on there had to do with the sweeping or clearing the oceans of the mines. I've heard other sailors and even merchant marines talk about that North Atlantic was not a fun trip anyway because it's choppy and in the wintertime it's awful. The ice and everything and the icebergs and stuff that you have to watch out for. Cape Hatteras, North Carolina was famous for their storms over there, and we get in the storms off of that place. And it did pretty rough in there at times. I don't have information with me right here, but anyway.
Well, I mean, and that's just a fact. I mean, not only was it the enemy, the Germans or whatever particular area of the country or the world you were in fighting, it was the sea itself.
Oh, yeah.
And the weather on top of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard of people coming back on ships and go through a storm, and the ship would have to be decommissioned because the storm beat it up so bad. Did y'all go through? Do you remember some bad storms that shook y'all up?
We got a couple of storms. Anytime we went through Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, you were going to have a storm out there. One time we got down in what we call a trough. In other words, down at the bottom of the wave. We leaned over about 48 degrees.
Oh, my
and that ship is just about all night long was leaning over that far. And we got to New York, and we had to practically go in the shipyard to replace equipment.
Well, you said it was in the middle of the night. Was everybody in their bunk asleep?
Well, they were in the bunk, but they weren't asleep, I guess. They had me on gun watch on the flying bridge, which is the highest point on there. And you could reach over and slap the water, and I said, I don't know what the heck we're doing up here. Nobody's submarine's going to come up this time of way.
So you were on deck, up on what do you call it, the gun?
Up on the flying bridge,
flying bridge. Yeah. And the waves, whenever it would roll from side to side.
They were way up above your head.
And you could near about touch the water.
But it'd be like a cork in the water.
Good gracious.
I mean, because we were sort of flat bottom in a way, they couldn't couldn't afford to have too much draft, as they called it. And so they were sort of flat bottoms. They'd bob around quite a bit.
Whew. It's a good thing you're probably a young man, but I still think I would have been terrified through some of that.
Oh, it's scary, I guarantee you.
Okay, so let's talk a little further. I know that you had shared with me earlier about you were involved in these convoys going across the North Atlantic up Nova Scotia and that route, but you also went to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
That was a pretty big convoy over to North Africa. Tell us about that convoy and some about your duty and responsibility with your ship in the Caribbean and Mediterranean.
Well, there was strictly convoy duty. Like I say, these oil islands, Aruba and Curacao, Dutch islands down there, there was a lot of oil down there. So they were hauling all this oil back to the States. And that was what we would escort these tankers.
Wow.
Primarily tankers down there.
Did we see many German submarines off the coast of the United States?
You never saw them. They were here, though, because they were mining parts of this country, too. People don't realize that. Even up in Chesapeake Bay, they mine places up there in all Florida. In the Caribbean Ocean, that also mines places out there. Anything where we said to send ships, they would mine it in other words, to block the harbor. Sink a ship, block the harbor.
Good gracious. I just didn't really think about submarines. It sounds like what you're saying is, after a while, the technology for both the United States and Great Britain got so good, we were sinking submarines, German submarines, pretty regular.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I guess they decided the safest thing for them to do would just be to lay a lot of mines.
Yeah.
And they could just do that and not have to expose themselves to a direct
It was quite a number of ships that actually
yeah.
sunk in the Gulf of Mexico. That's where we picked up these survivors in the Gulf.
My goodness.
And so it was quite a number of ships there because they'd come out of Texas down the oil company, and they would come out through there, and submarines lay in the middle of the ocean there waiting for them.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It's hard to think about World War II being so close to the United States. A lot of people don't think about it.
Yeah.
But it was right off our coast.
Well, they mined all along the Florida coast. The Germans came in and laid mines. Of course, we did too.
Right.
But Germans were right up in Chesapeake Bay, even dropping mines in there.
Good gracious. Well, we're talking Mr. Miles Jones, who is a veteran of World War II, and this has really been interesting, and we're not nearly through. So we're going to conclude today's, and we're going to do a second program, kind of an addendum to the first one, to be able to talk with Mr. Miles and get all of these stories that he wants to share with us. So this concludes our part one of our interview with Mr. Miles Jones, and stay tuned in the near future for part two. Well, good morning. This is Jack Rutland with True American Heroes for the Record, and today we're going to do part two of our guest, Mr. Miles Jones, who is no stranger to everyone, who I think even has a radio background. Most folks probably know Mr. Miles over the years, 30-something years on the radio. But today he's sharing his experiences as a World War II seaman, served in the United States Navy on the minesweeper Raven, the USS Raven. And it's been a really interesting discussion, Mr. Miles. Again, thank you for giving us the time to share these stories.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to do it. I think a lot of people ought to know what happened back then.
Well, we don't need to forget. That's absolutely the reason that we do this. Well, I'll just recap for those who are hearing for the first time. Mr. Miles is living in Hazelhurst now, but kind of grew up around the States over on the East Coast. In his young days, entered World War II as a Navy volunteered for the U.S. Navy, and fortunately was able to get in the U.S. Navy, and was assigned almost immediately after his training to a ship, the USS Raven, as we said, which was a minesweeper. And he shared with us earlier about his responsibilities on the ship, and we talked earlier on the first program about a lot of convoy duty in the North Atlantic, and then even down in the Caribbean, escorting convoys who were bringing fuel and oil up the coast to be shipped across to England and to Europe to support the war effort. Major responsibility that all of these escort ships had in getting those convoys across the ocean to the Allies to be used in the conflict, because the German U-boats were just everywhere, and they were very effective, especially in the early parts of the year. So, Mr. Miles, we're grateful. We're glad to have you back in here sharing with us your experiences. And today I want to go in another direction of your wartime experiences and your time in the Navy, because a significant part of what your ship did even though it was important in what it was doing in escorting those convoys, you had a major influence and a major mission as you guys escorted a convoy over to North Africa.
Right.
Now, that in itself was a pretty good trip. Mm-hmm. North Africa's a pretty good ways, even further than England, I think. So it probably took you a while to get there, and you're escorting a huge convoy?
Well, I didn't. The ship had been to North Africa before I got aboard. They had come back to this country.
So they were coming back.
They were coming, and then we had all this other escort duty after they came back.
Okay.
And that was before we went over to Europe, of course. But we never.
I got my story backwards there. I apologize.
Our escort duty was up and down the Atlantic coast, you might say.
But then, though, your ship was sent over to Europe.
Right. That was in preparation for D-Day.
We were sharing stories a while ago, and there was a lot of hard things to talk about in the conflict. But it affected millions of people who lost their lives, civilians and military. You were talking about some of the duty responsibilities your ship had. And you were sharing one experience where you had picked up a group of survivors in the Gulf and were bringing them back in, but then you got sent.
Well, that was the good news because all those survived, all of them in good shape, and that was in December of '43. And then we went on up to New York, and it was, of course, wintertime by then up in that area of the country. And a tanker or a ship had rammed this little gunboat and killed all the sailors on there. It was a former yacht they had converted to a gunboat. And we picked up, they died of drowning or hypothermia or something like that. We don't know what all. Yeah. And I don't know how many bodies were out there, but we had to pick up 5 of them. So you went from something happy to rescue and save people up to recovery, and then you'd see a young guy, if I were real young, your name is crossed you like Scotty or something, and it really got next to us.
I bet it did. Let me ask you, how big? Tell us about your ship. You showed me a picture of it. It's a beautiful ship, a little smaller than a destroyer.
Yeah.
Tell us about the Raven, the size, and how many crew. And
well, we had a crew of 105 and about 9 officers on it. A usually average of 105, and it was 220 feet long, and the draft, as we called it, about 9 to 14 feet, according to how loaded you were.
Sure.
And we were pretty well armored for anti-aircraft as well. We had 2 3-inch guns. Later on, changed one of them out, and 4 20-millimeter guns, and then had 2 depth charge racks and 2 Y guns. That's all the depth charge things on that.
Right.
And,
well, that's a busy ship with that many guys. Y'all, there was a lot going on. What was your actual assignment or responsibility?
Well, I was a gunner's mate. It
Gunner's
was up
mate.
to me to take care of, help be one of them, take care of the ammunition and maintaining the guns and making things of that sort, and give training classes on gunnery school too. Now I was actually during a general quarters. I was the gunner on 20 millimeter, which is an anti-aircraft gun.
Was that the ones that had the
shoulder
arms,
strap on it?
Shoulder strap on you and everything. Now tell us what general quarters are.
The general quarters, that's when emergency, the first thing, during wartime at dawn, you sounded general quarters a half hour before sunup. And you had to stay up at the general quarters till after sunup. And everybody's at the battle stations, you might say. And then, too, in an emergency, you got to contact a submarine maybe, or what you thought, general quarters. You go to the battle stations, what it amounts to.
Battle stations. Well, why would you go to battle stations 30 minutes before sunrise?
Very easily, because submarine be out there and they can spot your silhouette on the skyline, on the line. See?
A very dangerous. Every morning you had to prepare for battle before breakfast, probably.
Right.
My goodness.
Yeah, that was routine when you were at sea.
Interesting. Okay, so now as we get a little bit later in the war, your ship is sent to Europe.
Right.
Tell us about that mission. Were you, first of all, escorting a convoy at that time, or were you just...
Yes, we were told it was one of the largest convoys that had been formed at that particular time when we left here and went to England. We went to, Plymouth, England was our main port, and we went all the way up there. And between the time we arrived and the time of D-Day invasion, we escort duty and just practice. because we was minesweeping. You had to get out there and sweep all the time because you'd clear an area you think was clear, and the Germans would come back at night and remine it.
No, you had to repeat same locations over and over because you never knew when that German would come in with new mines.
All right, then for the D-Day invasion, we've got a slogan in the mine warfare: where the fleet goes, we've been. It means we have led the fleet. They could not hold an invasion until the minesweepers went in. And the USS Osprey was the ship ahead of us, and they got hit a mine on about 6 o'clock June the 5th, which, by the way, was supposed to be the invasion date,
right. They had postponed
But they hit a mine right ahead of us, about 600 yards ahead of us, and they hit a mine and sank. And then, of course, we were lit up like a Christmas tree. We had these lighted buoys on the ship. These sheep ahead of us was clearing the lanes. Then we would drop the buoys for the ships to be in the safe lanes.
And this was critical for the invasion because your buoys was what told them where it's a safe place to go. We know there's not mines here, so you better stay within these buoys.
I hope they weren't. We got them.
So when your sister ship was hit and sunk, I mean, did you guys were you able to save any of the crew that?
Well, we didn't because we were the last one to drop the buoys. They were also a buoy ship, and if we had stopped there, there'd been a lane that wouldn't have had the lighted buoys. So they had one of the other two ships on these that we were with went. Then they had PT boats out there would follow and pick up survivors,
rescue the survivors.
Yeah.
Wow, this is incredible. And this is December the 5th. Now, if I'm not mistaken, if my history doesn't fail me, I believe December
June. Talking about
June 5th. You were still having some rough seas.
Oh yeah,
because the stormy weather didn't break off until right before June.
English Channel was bad about that. They formed what they call the Mulberry Line, that portable. Right. They took all these old ships and sunk them and tried to make a port out of them. When a storm came and wrecked them.
But that was right after
the invasion. Huh?
But you guys were out in rough seas on the 5th, in the mornings, or was it night?
Well, all the time.
It didn't matter.
Oh no.
You were doing what you had to do to get ready for the invasion the next day.
Well, we got there and made the invasion fleet. We were off the coast of France a little after midnight. They hadn't even started the bombardment by then, and we could see the lights from the shore. We were still pretty far out, but then we had to sweep areas so the battleships and cruisers could come in for the bombardment. So we were sweeping that area, and then they finally started the bombardment. We stayed off to a side, and shells, we could see the shells going over our heads up there, and the little ship would just rock back and forth, from the percussion.
Good. So I'm sitting here with Mr. Mal Jones as he's sharing his experience upon the U.S. Navy ship Raven, minesweep, and right now we're talking about his experiences on June 5th, the day before the D-Day invasion, and imperative, extremely important mission that the minesweeps had before the actual troop ships showed up the next day. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm honored to have with me today Mr. Mal Jones from Hazelhurst, Mississippi, United States Navy veteran of World War II. And we've been talking about his experiences on the USS Raven, which was a minesweep. And we've been talking the last few minutes about the involvement of the Raven on D-Day. Mr. Mal, I mean, did you guys know that the invasion was about to start? Did the crew members know that?
We knew about 3 or 4 days before. We were over in Isle of Wight in England, where we left from, and they wouldn't let us off the ship. The only people who could leave the ship was an officer, and they had to have 2 officers leave at one time. They wouldn't let us off the ship. We knew it was coming up. We had an idea of what was happening, but we wasn't too sure.
Gotcha. Okay, so we were talking a moment ago about how you lost your sister ship. It was sunk, hit a mine, I'm assuming. Yeah. I mean, there you guys were sweeping, and a mine got up close enough to make contact and actually sank the ship. But then, after you worked all night long, on June 6th, you had a ringside seat to the Normandy invasion, D-Day. Right. Now, the Armada, the Allied ships, I've been told, looked like there were thousands of them. There was a huge number.
what impressed us a lot was come around dawn when these transport planes started going over. Literally, the sky was covered, and it was literally covered with planes, just constant going over, thousands and thousands.
So that was a combination of paratroopers,
right.
and probably some bombardment had started.
Well, the bombardment had started about midnight, a little after midnight.
Oh, okay.
So we had already swept that channel or that area so the battleships could get in there, the cruisers and ships, to do the bombardment.
Heavy guns, yeah.
Within a few miles off the coast. And we had already cleaned that out so they could get in there without danger, see.
Boy, what an incredibly important role the minesweeps played. And I never have really thought about that because those battleships couldn't, the closer they were, the more accurate they were. And also those transport ships, those GIs were crammed into those ships. They had to get as close as possible so that landing craft could get them to the beach. So you had a ringside seat.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, like I say, we were the first ones there. We had to be the first. We were the vanguard.
Where the fleet goes, a minesweep went first.
Let me throw this in right quick here, too. Hitler, had the idea of German, English invasion called the Lion or something like that. And Admiral Dornitz told him, said, well, we can clean your mine jobs. It's going to take us a couple weeks to do it. The Allies did it in about 12 or 14 hours.
Wow.
Part of it had been swept, and then, of course, we had to pick up from there on, but we had to clear those 8 lanes going into the beaches within just a few hours.
How many minesweeps were involved in that? Off the top
Literally hundreds.
Wow.
Literally hundreds, especially the little small ones, the little YMSs. They could get up closer to the beach than we could.
Wow. Okay, so June 6th is going on. You're a ringside seat. You're watching the shelling. And then you start seeing the ships, transport ships, with all those thousands of soldiers from different countries. And the invasion starts, and here come the little landing craft and bouncing because the water was still rough. I bet you, did you stay on station all day? Were you all there all day?
Mm-hmm. You had to be up there all day long, at least the first 24 hours. You had to be up all the time.
Which beach were you guys off of?
Well, we were actually at both of them. Because we had to go up and down clearing all the beaches, the whole area, see.
Utah and
Omaha.
So I imagine the explosions, the noise, and everything was just unbelievable.
Well, it was pretty far away. It was pretty. We could see the fires, but it'd be about it. We couldn't hear too much.
So what? At the end of the day, did you guys have another assignment, another role in the invasion?
Minesweeping.
Continuing?
We clear out this area, and then, of course, we couldn't sweep at night because you couldn't see the ships ahead of you. So then we'd have to go back the next day and go over the same area because the Germans would come in and remine it. You'd sweep it today, they'd come in at night and put more mines down. So we really didn't know. And then had to keep on clearing areas out to get so these ships could get in there larger.
So how long were you actually in the vicinity of Normandy?
We were in Normandy about right at 18 days. Wow. We did have to go back to England one time. We had our evaporator that made fresh water. We had to go back and get that replaced. And then they had one of the other ships that gotten peppered with shrapnel, and we escorted them back, which, by the way, we had to stop and pick up survivors off the LST had gotten mined, too. So we were pretty active anywhere we went.
Good gracious. All right, so that's D-Day. That's one of the most significant dates and events in all of military history. And actually, it started the liberation of Europe. Yeah. After D-Day, once we get the foothold, what was the Raven do?
Allies needed a harbor. There was only one major harbor over there, and that was Cherbourg.
That's right.
Well, they had to take that because they get those ships in, unload off the beach instead of hauling it in from the ocean. So that was a big operation. There was probably 400 or 500 mines around that harbor area alone. So the Allies soldiers came in from the beach, and we came in from the ocean to finally capture Cherbourg. And we were sent down there to help clear that minefield up around that area too, so they could open it up for a port. That was the important thing for the Normandy invasion, was getting that open port so they could get to land.
That sounds like quite a task. How long were you there?
Task. Yeah, it was very, very important.
How many days did that take? Probably weeks?
Probably 4 or 5 days or something.
Okay.
Because the soldiers came in from the beaches.
Well, that's true.
And the Germans were pretty well whipped up on the beach by then anyway, see.
Okay.
Of course, still a lot of resistance, no doubt about that.
Oh, yeah. So after you clear the port, where was the Raven headed then?
Well, we had to go back to England, get refitted, and do a little resupply, and then we headed down the Mediterranean for the South African invasion, South American, Southern Europe invasion.
That's right, from the south.
We were between the island of Sardinia and Corsica, and they had a channel coming through there. The invasion fleet went up through that, and we were out on that sweeping while the invasion fleet went through.
Were there usually multiple mine sweeps?
Oh, yeah. You always
that
had
would
4 or 5.
clear an area?
Yeah. You had 4 or 5 of them operating
Side
together.
by side, but
Well, usually one behind the other.
okay.
Yeah.
And then they would lay the buoys, and that would show the ships where they could go.
Right.
Interesting. All right, so you're in South Africa, and you're probably now
South America.
I said South Africa. Excuse me, South America. South
We're
America,
Southern France, folks.
Southern France, and the Mediterranean.
Lost the war here and didn't know it.
That's right. So now, how long were you actually in the Mediterranean?
Let's see. We got down in the Mediterranean in August. That's when the invasion took place there.
Okay.
Invasion. July 44, we were down through there.
Okay.
And Southern France invasion actually took place in August 23rd.
Okay. As the war starts to become more a European conflict, what all were you guys still doing? I mean,
Same thing.
Just kept on doing the mine
Same
sweeps.
over and over and over.
Okay.
We were in Marseille in Nice, France. We had to patrol that area through there, kept mine sweeping. And then they had a river between Italy and France, and the Germans would drop mines and float them out. So we had trouble with floating mines on that thing.
You ever
They'd come out with the tide.
Ever see any German prisoners, POWs?
Oh, yeah. We didn't get any liberty and all in Europe till we got down to Marseille. Then we passed a lot of German prisoners of war down through there.
Goodness.
No, we didn't get Normandy at all. Over in Normandy.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're getting close to the end of the war.
Right.
Do you remember where you were when the war ended? When you heard about it?
I was in Marseille, France.
Oh, you were on shore.
No, we were home ported in Marseille.
Okay.
No, we stayed on the ship.
Yeah.
But I was on Liberty. That was our Liberty port, as we called it.
Liberty.
But,
So how did the French people treat you?
Well,
or the
I got
Italian?
along with them pretty good.
Did you see it? Were you in Italy any, or just mainly France?
Well, we were in both places.
Okay.
Yeah, we were all up and down the Italian coast. But I got along with the people over there. You can find some of them speak pretty good English.
Really?
And a lot of them say, well, the Frenchmen, they're snobby and all. And to me, they weren't.
Good.
Not at all.
Neat.
I bet some real nice people over there.
So when you heard the war was over, you remember anything about it?
Yeah. Wonder when we was going to go to the Pacific, because we knew we were going.
I've interviewed so many men, and that was the thing they said. As soon as they knew the war had ended in Europe, their first thought is, when are they going to send us to the Pacific?
Now, the French did a lot of celebrating VE Day. And we're here. We might as well wait and see when we're going to leave. Because we just took it for granted we were going, see. But the French really tore the place up celebrating their VE Day over there.
Okay, war in Europe ends, and you're waiting for orders, thinking like everybody that you were going to the Pacific. What took place on the Raven? How did it go? I mean, were you actually still in France when the war in the Pacific ended?
VE Day, yeah.
VJ Day?
We stayed over there for another month or two, and then came back to this country, went down to Norfolk, and they rebuilt the whole ship. And the Raven, and I was still aboard at that time, went over to the Gulf, to the Pacific coast, and
Really?
heading to Japan. In fact, we were ready to go, and then they decided to decommission it, as I say.
So you made the trip through the canal around the
Right,
Pacific coast, and were ready to go, and thankfully the war ended.
Went as high as Astoria, Oregon, and did some decommissioning up there, as they call it. Decommissioning, you take a ship and you clean it up, and you put everything on it it's supposed to be, and then they put it in mothballs. So in case of a war, they need it, and all they had to do is go in and unwrap it and go to war. That was decommissioning.
Wow.
And the inglorious end to our little Raven was they finally used it. They kept it for years and years in mothball fleet, and then they sank it with New Jersey, used it for target practice.
I
that
read
hurt.
That. I read that. Well, I'm telling you, this has been so interesting, Mr. Mile. We're so honored to have you in here, a World War II veteran, and we're grateful for your service. And let me say, as I do to all of my vets, thank you so much for your service to your country. We're grateful that you were willing to serve and you served so well. It's just been an honor to have you with us today. Any final comments you'd like to give?
Moment, so I got some figures here that might be interesting to people.
Yes.
For the Normandy invasion, a total of 1,213 warships.
Wow.
4,126 amphibious craft. That included landing craft, LSD and all like that. More than 3,500 in the actual invasion, and over 700 transport planes.
Good gracious.
So that gives you an idea. Now, that's a war thing of it. Think of supplies that had to go in to back up all of these things.
Amazing.
It shocked me when I got to reading all those figures.
Well, it's been an honor to have you with us, Mr. Mile Jones, Hazelhurst. You be sure you tell all your coffee club buddies that you're going to be on the radio.
I'm going to do it. What time? They're going to want to know. I know that.
We'll find out. We'll try to get you some information on when this is going to broadcast. Right. But again, thank you for coming in. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for serving your country.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to do so. I'm glad to be able to brag about the good old Raven and World War II.
Good for you. Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Thank you very much, fellas.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.